The simple method to program your planche training is by structuring your workouts into a periodized program. This means having a hypertrophy phase, a strength phase, and a peaking phase. And I'm going to explain exactly what that means in this video. As always, all the information in this video is coming from sports science research and this book, Overcoming Gravity by Stephen Lowe. If you haven't read this book, then you guys really need to if you're into bodyweight training. Now, let's get straight into it. First off, we're going to go over the inter-workout programming strength principles. This is going to explain why your workout isn't only one individual workout. You actually use your workouts together to get you to your goal. So if your goal is a specific static skill or dynamic exercise, those workouts don't work individually to get you to that skill. They work together, and we need to program them as such to get us to that goal. So let's explain those principles now. So periodization is just your training plan, and as long as you're changing some aspect of your training, so you're not doing the same identical workout with the same identical weight every time, then you're periodizing. You're changing something in your workout so that you can progress. So that's all you need to do and think about periodization. It's just your training plan. So now we know that periodization is just our training plan and changing elements within our training in order to progress. However, not all periodization is created equal. You can have not so effective periodization where you're adding loads of amount of weight, or say you're doing loads of attempts of the full planche even though you're nowhere near it. That's not really effective periodization because the intensity is too high in those workouts. You're not going to get the correct amount of stimulus to create the correct amount of adaptations that you want, which is of course what we want to do to gain the planche strength. So there is effective periodization. So the next question is, how do we periodize our training plan effectively? And following on from that, why do we want to actually periodize? Well, that's because we can't always be at 100% of our max capacity of strength. So for example, you can't always do that 8-second straddle planche hold with perfect form. Sometimes it's going to be 3, maybe 4 seconds. And why? Why can't we always be fresh and ready for that workout? Well, that's because of fitness and fatigue. So quickly, let's explain fitness and fatigue. So workouts produce two effects on the body. One is fitness, which is a positive effect on the body due to that workout. The second is fatigue, which is a negative effect on the body due to that workout. Fatigue causes those negative effects on the body, such as those aches and pains, but also masks those positive effects of fitness. Sometime after a workout, you will get stronger in whatever attribute you were training. This is that positive effect of fitness. For example, if you train for combinations, you will get better at combinations, so be able to have more endurance to do those longer sets. If you train for real power in your planche push-ups, then you will get stronger in that explosive power. Fitness takes a long time to accumulate, but once it's there, it takes a long time to decay. But fatigue, on the other hand, is very quick to accumulate. So straight after your workout you can start feeling tired and fatigued, but it's really quick to dissipate. So it takes around 48 to 72 hours to completely dissipate in fatigue. So as you can gather, we want to increase fitness but reduce fatigue, and the reason we want to do this is because this will increase our performance. Performance is just your fitness minus your fatigue. So the more fitness you have built up in terms of that specific strength aspect you're training, and the less amount of fatigue you have, then the more performance you can expect. And the more performance means you're going to get those longer sets, you're going to be able to hold that next progression. That's what we want to do. We want to increase our performance in terms of our static skills. So this explains why we want to periodize effectively. We want to increase fitness while decreasing fatigue to increase our performance, and that performance will help us get that next progression, get us those longer holds, and basically help us achieve our goals. Okay, so now that you know that, your next question might be, okay, how do I increase fitness while decreasing my fatigue as much as possible? And well, the simple answer is recovery. To counteract fatigue, you need rest. So now we know the way to reduce fatigue is by using rest and recovery. This is why it's so important to actually program your rest and recovery periods, those days when you're not training, into your training program. So what we call rest days. Those rest days, we'll just keep training and training, so the frequency of our workouts will be way too high and we won't recover. If this happens, our fatigue will be higher than our fitness. If that happens, then our performance is going to be negative, so we're not going to be making progress. What we want is our fitness to always be above our fatigue, so at least then we can keep making progress. So this is why, even though you have some fatigue built up, you should keep training, because as long as your fitness is above your fatigue, then you're going to keep being able to make progress. But there is a limit to this, and this is where you're going to want to deload. And when we go on to explaining some training cycles, that's when I'm going to explain deloading. So for now, just know that even though you have some accumulated fatigue from earlier workouts, maybe early in the week, that doesn't mean you shouldn't train at all. There will be some times where if you program correctly, even though you have that fatigue, you can still make progress in your training. Now we know how to reduce fatigue, we can see the increase of our fitness over time and actually see that improvement in performance. This new and enhanced performance we have that we didn't have before those workouts is due to something called supercompensation. This is a concept that states that once multiple workouts are completed, that reduces your capacity of work. Once you've recovered, you will get a rebound effect where you will actually come back stronger and be able to have more capacity for that specific work that you train. This is something that isn't seen if you only do one individual workout. However, the training stimulus from those workouts need to be enough to cause that supercompensation effect, but not too much where you cause overtraining. Overtraining is when you either have done too much frequency, too much volume, or too much intensity of a certain exercise or workout, so you get this increased accumulated fatigue that takes a decent amount of time to really dissipate and decay, so your fitness is subdued because of this. Which of course means your performance is going to be decreased for a certain amount of time until you've fully recovered. And during this time, it's going to be super hard, almost impossible to make progress because that fatigue is so high. Okay, so now we know what periodization is, what fitness and fatigue does to our body, and how these relate to performance, which of course is going to help us get to our end goal, and of course how important rest and recovery is and not getting to that point where you're overtraining. Okay, so we know that progressive overload is our training plan and how we're changing aspects of our training over time in order to progress, because we know that progressive overload is essential for causing adaptations to the body so that we can get stronger, bigger, faster, whatever it is, hold the planche longer. That means in our training program, we need to be changing different variables. We need to be manipulating our training. So that can be things like adding weight, using resistance bands, adding weight to our body weight push-ups, things like that. These things are going to manipulate either volume or intensity. Those are the main two we're going to be focusing on. So if you don't know, intensity is a measure of the quality of work performed, or in other words, how hard is the exercise. So for an advanced athlete, the full planche is a lot more intense than the tuck planche. So the intensity is harder in the full planche than in the tuck planche. On the other hand, volume is the amount of work or exercise performed. So first you have linear periodization. This is the most basic form of periodization. So you increase over time the intensity. You start with a low intensity and then you keep going, building on the intensity each workout or each cycle until you reach your peak intensity, and then you drop, hit a deload or a full rest week, and then you go again. So imagine you're doing pseudo planche push-ups up against a wall. The first few weeks you'll just do it like a normal push-ups. Then maybe you start moving your hands backwards further away from the wall, so you have to lean more. This will increase the intensity on certain parts of your body, such as your shoulders. So over the coming weeks, you'd increase the intensity by moving further and further away from the wall, so you have to lean more. The problem with this is you hit a certain point where you're not going to be able to keep incrementally, increasing intensity and still progressing. So it's not always the best form of periodization, but it does have its moments where you do need to linearly periodize. The next form of periodization we have is wave periodization. It's very similar to linear periodization. However, over the coming weeks, as we increase intensity, once we get at or near our max potential in terms of strength, we hit a deload, a full week of rest. That's to dissipate the fatigue, and then once we start again, we start at almost our new baseline level. Our baseline level has moved up and we start again increasing fatigue from that new baseline, so we should be able to hit a new max peak, and we keep doing that over time. It's kind of like a step ladder. Over time we keep getting higher and higher in terms of our peak performance. We then have undulating periodization, which is a change in the intensity or volume according to what week it is, or maybe even what day of the week. So maybe on Monday, you have a high volume planche day. You're doing a high volume of planche presses and planche push-ups. Then the next day, maybe on the Thursday later in the week, then you have a high intensity day. So this is undulating. You're changing the intensity and the volume for certain exercises because we don't want to accumulate too much fatigue to affect certain exercises. So there's a lot of intricacies to these training programs and to these periodizations. So if you want a full video on it, yeah, I can make that for you, but that's a brief explanation. The last periodization that we have is block periodization. So this is a more classical form of periodization. You might have seen this a lot, and that's where you have a certain phase that's focusing on a certain attribute. So first you might have a hypertrophy phase, which is focusing on building muscle. Then you have a strength phase, which is focusing on increasing that intensity. Then you have a peaking phase that's focused on testing your max potential. So now we're going to move on to constructing your program. You want to work backwards when you're constructing your program. So you want to go from your goals down to, okay, what periodization form do I want to use? Undulating? Do I want to use linear progression? Or do I want to use a block form of periodization? Then from there, we can look further at the training cycles to understand what length of times we're working in and what training splits are going to work for us. So now let's explain our training cycles. So there are three different types of training cycles. You have microcycles, mesocycles, and macrocycles. Microcycles are the smallest form or unit of our training cycle. The only thing smaller than that is an individual workout, but we know we don't work on an individual workout basis. So that's why it's really good to work on a microcycle basis. And a microcycle is usually just 1 week. So you can think of one microcycle as just 1 week of training. Next, you have the mesocycle, which is around 4 to 6 weeks. So you can have around 4 to 6 microcycles in one mesocycle. And lastly, we have macrocycles, which are really large periods of time. Usually about 3 to 4 mesocycles can fit in one macrocycle. So that means they're usually around 3 to 4 months. Okay, so now we know the training cycles or the lengths of times that we're going to be planning our program into. Now let's look into the mesocycle a bit more. So what are our workouts from week to week going to look like? Usually for strength training and calisthenics skills, you're going to split your mesocycles into 3 stages. First is an accumulation cycle, which is basically a hypertrophy phase. The next is an intensity cycle, which is basically a strength phase. And lastly is a realization cycle, which is basically your peaking phase, so where you're going to test your maxes. You can plan your mesocycles like that, or you can do a bit more research into the linear periodization, undulating, and then plan your mesocycles a little bit differently. But this is a nice easy one to understand. You're going from a hypertrophy phase into a strength phase into testing your maxes. So I hope you're getting value out of the channel, and just a quick reminder, we're sponsored by Gore Nation, which is a calisthenics brand, and we're also now newly sponsored by Vivo Life. It's an ethical supplement brand, and it's now where I get all my supplements from. I'm going to have a video coming on supplements that gymnasts and calisthenics athletes take and should be taking to increase performance. But if you do want to look at any of those products, check the links in the description. At both places you can use Jack10 for minus 10% off at checkout, and it'll help me out. So if you're enjoying the video, please check out those links. And yeah, let's carry on with the video. Okay, so once you've planned out your training cycles, so what length of time you're going to be training for, whether it's going to be 4 weeks or 6 weeks, then deload, and then another 4 or 6 weeks. So those are your mesocycles. Then you can now look at your microcycles. Planning our microcycles, in other words, our training week, means we're going to need to decide our training routine or split. You guys would have heard of these splits before. There's full body split, upper lower, push pull legs, straight arm, bent arm, and there's a few others as well. You guys would have heard these or seen these floating around. Maybe some of you have followed this before. There's different kinds of splits, but you're going to need to decide which is best for you. So guys, once you've decided what training split is right for you, and if you guys need help with that, then comment down below. I'll make a video on your training split, which one's right for you, and then also the periodization, which one's going to be right for you to help achieve your goals. So if you need that, comment down below. Once you've decided that, you'll know your frequency, so how many times a week you're going to be training. But the next thing you're going to need to work out is, okay, what am I going to do in my individual workouts? So you're going to need to answer questions like, how many sets and reps am I doing? What is my exercise selection going to be doing? Am I going to be doing attempts? How long am I going to hold my attempts or my progressions? Am I going to use bands or just progressions without a band? So these are all going to be questions you're going to need to answer. But until then, that's a question for another video. But you're going to need to watch this video, because in this video I explain the strength principle equation that helps explain how you build strength for calisthenics strength skills, and you're going to need to know these principles for programming your training.